John, I want to welcome you to the Penthouse Suite interviews. We're delighted to have you with us today. Normally, we'd be doing these interviews in the penthouse of the Francis Marion Hotel in downtown Charleston, but because the situation that we all find ourselves in, we're not able to do that, and we're doing all our programming via Zoom, including our Penthouse Suite interviews. So I want to not only welcome you, but thank you for taking on another Zoom meeting. We really appreciate you doing that. And without further ado, let me turn the first question over to Anne.
All right. Well, John, in your wonderful presentation at the Charleston conference, you promoted the need for what you called a digital public infrastructure. And so for our viewers who may not be familiar with that concept, what do you mean by digital public infrastructure, and why do we need that?
Tom and Ann, thank you very much for doing an extra Zoom with me, which I appreciate. And Ann, I love seeing the real penthouse behind you. That's quite cool. And I hope someday to join you in Charleston in a future year. That would be fun. And I really loved being part of your event, having heard about it for so many years. And yes, Ann, I made the case for a digital public infrastructure. That's not a thought unique to me by any stretch of the imagination. Many people are working on it in a variety of ways. But the idea being that if you think about the internet and cyberspace, however you want to define it, the emerging digital space, it's important, I think, that there are aspects of it that are held in public hands, or at least held in hands that are holding it for the public interest. And I do believe that libraries, by and large, whether they're a private library or a public library, that they have the public interest, generally speaking, in mind, and serve the public interest, whether that's a research library that is serving, the advancement of knowledge, or it's a public library that's serving the people of a particular geography, or a digital library as they emerge and serve people all over. And what I fear is sort of an enclosure movement continuing on the internet, where the spaces are held in private hands, but for profit purposes. And we've seen this certainly in the platform zone, where news and information, which have typically been shared in sort of public interested ways by newspapers and other news outlets, they are now controlled fairly heavily by a series of small number of platforms. And I fear kind of the same thing in the library space. And I think it's very important that we emphasize digital public infrastructure, and whether that's cloud infrastructure, or that's something like the Digital Public Library of America, for which I make a case, or any number of digital systems that will serve libraries and ultimately the public.
Okay.
One thing I also noticed you say regarding the digital public infrastructure is that you felt that it was within the superpower of librarians to play a major role in the development of such an infrastructure. What gives you that level of confidence in librarians, and what would librarians have to do to prove you right?
So wonderful question. Yes. The backbone of my address was praising the superpowers of librarians and the importance of librarians, really to create the future, and to create the kind of world that we like and would want, and to envision that, and then to build it. And part of it is just having been somebody outside of libraries for a long time, but who was always admiring of the leadership shown by librarians in a number of fields. So as a lawyer interested in technology, on issues like privacy, on intellectual property, and so forth, I always found libraries, whether represented by the ALA or by individual librarians, were often there ahead of others, saying this is a really important thing for us to foreground. For instance, privacy in the context of the aftermath of 9/11 and the Patriot Act. Libraries were forceful, I think, voice thinking about digital privacy at that time. Certainly thinking about copyright reform and ensuring that at least there are exceptions for libraries for those who are less sighted than others and so forth. Librarians have been in a very important advocacy mode, I think, on a number of issues. I think today that's in part around diversity, equity, inclusion. Librarians have certainly stepped up to that mantle and focused on access for many communities and so forth. I haven't seen as much of the leadership in the digital public infrastructure space for librarians, and I think that's an interesting point from my perspective, which is if if you think about search, that has been dominated, of course, by private players and Google in particular, but, there are others. But librarians, while it's clearly central to the work that librarians and information architects and so forth do, that has been dominated by private sector actors. You think about, the great encyclopedia that has developed online. I think the greatest encyclopedia in the history of humankind, Wikipedia, that was a former commodities trader, right? And a bunch of graduate students in, wherever they were, in Germany, in the US, elsewhere, who have stepped up and volunteered, not a ton of librarians, involved in that and so forth. So partly the tough love message is saying, let's ensure that we invest enough in this, because I actually don't think that relying upon vendors or relying upon more broadly the big technology companies is going to be a great outcome. I think it's going to put librarians as in a more passive posture in the future, and I think that's only continuing to grow as the importance of the digital sphere grows.
It sounds like you're advocating more of an activist role on the part of librarians to get involved and create some of these things.
Yeah. I think sort of a hands dirty activist role, as in, actually build stuff. And of course, there are, interested pods of librarians who do some of this, but I do think that merger of information technology and libraries, as that happens, whether it's in iSchools or it's within organizations, is so important. When I was a library director, we invested in a library innovation lab that persists at that library, which, brought in, designers and coders and others who knew nothing about libraries, but were, in concert with trying to solve problems with librarians. So certainly that's I advocate for that. So it's activist, yes, for sure. I think it's calling for vision, and librarians saying there is special knowledge that librarians have of what we need and what people need in the information space, and then actually getting in there and building it, whether that's in partnership with others or building the skills from within the library field.
Thank you, John.
You had said that logically, it's going to take a great deal of collaboration to make digital public infrastructure a reality. I was just working on a talk for Friday about collections. I'm an old collections librarian. And I was looking at some of the cooperative collection development programs writ large that libraries have entered into, and not a lot of them with great success yet. There are a couple of success stories, but there aren't many. But you said we need radical collaboration. And given, I think, librarians' not great track record at large scale radical collaboration, what do you mean by that? And how can we step up to that?
Well, I certainly stand behind the efforts and that you and others have led around collaboration among collection specialists and people who are ensuring that there is at least an effort in that direction. That is, I think, one angle of radical collaboration. We were involved in one in New England among law libraries, which I think was moderately successful. Of course, the Too Cool combination in Columbia and Cornell. So, there are a handful of I think, quite specific and helpful examples. Maybe not as large scale as they need to be, and maybe maybe there are more failures than there are successes there. But I give credit to the ones that I know have been done well. I do think that when it comes to technology, given the amount of money that's being spent by others and the very strong profit motive by others, that librarians need to pool efforts, to a degree. And, obviously the area that I have focused on was by helping to pull together and then helping to fund the Digital Public Library of America. The idea there being a really simple one, which was that it seemed to me in the wake of the Google Books project, which at that point was sort of breaking down, at least in the sort of large-scale ambition, there were all these different digitization efforts by large university libraries, by places like the Library of Congress or the Smithsonian, their big, public institutions, the New York Public Library and others. But it was really difficult. It remains really difficult if people digitize things differently to find, the stuff, right? You actually have to go into the silo or have access to the silo, even if they are, in theory, publicly available, just to do that together, right? To say, we're actually going to coordinate on this. We're going to agree on some metadata standards. We're actually going to have a layer, to be able to find it. And, today, if you go to DPLA, it's got, tens of millions of objects that now you can find across these things. Not perfect, but there are, I think it is possible to say, we're going to do this in a coordinated fashion. And I believe that librarians are smart enough to let, the sort of egos off to the side and actually to get together and work together. So I think it probably is figuring out what are the layers in the digital public infrastructure stack that need to be developed, which ones can be done collaboratively, and whether that's the sort of archival storage piece and then the access piece and the kind of definition of collection. I think there are a variety of ways to do it, but I do believe it could be quite powerful, and I think it would give that collective action. I think would give more power to librarians if well coordinated.
Well, I have hopes that the digital environment is a better space for that kind of collaboration, because the print collections, things I look back on, we're struggling and still are. Mm-hmm. But our success stories, I think, apart from DPLA now, are HathiTrust.
Yeah, HathiTrust for sure. Yeah,
that's pretty exceptional. And you may or may not call it a library, but the Internet Archive is another, and there are a lot of participating libraries in both of those initiatives, and people do seem to be happy to join and conform to the metadata rules and do what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. So I think we may have a prayer digitally in a way we do not in print. So
I absolutely agree with you. I do think that when you have a whiteboard that you can work with, a new slate, it does help, right? You can design something from the ground up, and if it feels like, it is the community doing it and it is accountable, and I feel like DPLA certainly has those roots. HathiTrust, I think, is a very, very good example among the research libraries and universities. It serves a crucial function. It's sort of an amazing feat. Internet Archive, which on some level could be seen initially as, one person's vision as Brewster's approach, but which has created, a larger tent, and certainly efforts like the controlled digital lending and otherwise have allowed many others to participate in. I think those are three very good, clear examples of success. And as you say, no one of them is a standard library. Each one of them is something that started as as kind of a whiteboard design, and maybe there's something in that periodically you just have to have that white space or that open space that to be able to do that thinking and creating.
Mm-hmm. It seems that the technology demands creativity to do this kind of, to collaborate and be creative and do these kinds of things. The three instances that you mentioned were highly creative endeavors, and I think that's what it's going to take is the continued creativity, and technology seems to draw that out. At least that's been my perception.
That seems just right to me, Tom. Yeah.
One thing that we all know, and this is something that you also brought up in your presentation, is that we are inundated by misinformation and alternative facts. And in the conference presentation, you saw that or felt that there was a role for librarians and libraries to combat this misinformation. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that and how you see that happening. And I also wonder how librarians can do it without becoming political.
It's a wonderful question, and I was tempted, given the timing of this talk, which is, as you'll recall, is maybe 3 days after the presidential election, historic presidential election, 2 days, I guess, after. I was tempted to focus entirely on misinformation, just because I do think it's such a dangerous thing for any democracy, certainly our democracy right now. And I do believe that the librarian superpower is one that can be applied to this problem for a couple of reasons. One is, if you look at the list of institutions out there and the rate of trust that people have in them, libraries very often rank #1 in those surveys of any kind of institution. So there's huge trust in libraries and librarians broadly among the public. And I think that's sort of what you need in an ecosystem like this. If the issue is who do you trust to tell you what the truth is? Who do you trust to provide the information and to share it or to sift it with you? And librarians, are in that position, well earned. And so there's a lot of sort of chits there to work with, right? Karmic positivity that librarians have to work with. The best way to do it is obviously very tricky. It's not a simple matter. It would have been solved long ago. But I do think that that's where the things that librarians learn as they become professionals, what they learn in library school or iSchool, what they learn through their professional development, it is it is something librarians know a lot about, which is, what information is more useful than others, what's better information, what's a better way to provide that and get that to people at the moment that they need it. So, there are of course many efforts to try to tap into librarian insight in this way, but I think more can be done by a lot. And if I were in the library profession, that would certainly be something that I would be emphasizing and drawing upon. In terms of how to do it in a non-political way, I don't think the truth is political. I just don't. And I think that there is, in a democracy, there are facts, and they should out. And librarians, I think, even though it may feel like you are being on the left by virtue of being in favor of, a certain kind of information, I just don't think fundamentally that's true over a long period of time. That may be true in this moment where there's a feeling that the right is all about putting out misinformation, the left is not, or whatever your fear might be. But of course, many people on the right are the ones saying that there's fake news. So, I think ultimately it's about doing one's best and having, good citations and good sources, which seems to me something librarians are pretty good at. And I think that would be bulletproof from a political perspective.
Well, I agree. I think it's certainly part of one of the key elements within our culture, within our professional culture, is getting the answer and getting the right answer. So yeah, I agree. Thank you, John.
Well, just to continue that for another second, I chair an IFLA committee, the News Media Committee, and our theme for this year has been fake news. And all of this has been virtual. We're running a lecture series in 4 parts with case studies about how librarians have stepped up in different places to deal with fake news. It doesn't feel to me as though this is an area. Well, no, our first talk was by a librarian in Ireland where they participated in a national fake news kind of blitz. And it was in collaboration with newspapers, television stations, the library community, and so on, and the kind of campaign they ran. So I think that was at a collaborative national level.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I think the recording is still up. Most of the other ones we've heard about have been small and local, like in a school library and how you work with children to help them distinguish facts from fictions. So there are a lot of things you can do on a small scale without being part of a national campaign.
Yeah,
but the Irish were amazing.
That's cool. But don't you think that maybe the answer is some of both, right? You do it in the way that you act and control the local space that you're in, whether that's in a local public library or school library or special library, whatever it might be, and you connect it to a national conversation, right? That seems to me kind of a way that the best experiences, as Brandeis said about the states being laboratories for democracy, right? The little efforts, I think, will build to those big national ones and could connect in a really interesting way. And I, if I could design one for the United States of America, I would have librarians at the table with the big, newspapers and news media outlets and the big platforms. And, I think you could have a pretty cool thing.
We should do that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm thinking of the
Why
Knight
not?
Foundation or one of those,
Yeah.
That may be a funding opportunity. Yeah, you're right.
Sure.
Yeah. So one of your questioners at the conference asked about the possibility of developing a digital public infrastructure for academic peer review. And you seem to be very enthusiastic about that. I was having a hard time wrapping my mind around how that might work or evolve. Do you have any further thoughts about that?
It's a wonderful question, and I think if I had 20 lives, I would devote one of them to this, because I think it's a neat idea. And have, as somebody who has published a bunch in peer-reviewed journals, I've always been struck by how kind of basic it is and not all that effective. And in my own field in law, as you probably know, those journals, they're wonderful, but they're run by students, right? It's the faculty members and senior practitioners who write them, but the editing is all done by current students that we're teaching or were in school at that time. And there's no peer review in most cases. It's actually just the most junior members and not even members yet of the profession who do it. And then you go to the examples where, of course, theoretically peer-reviewed things have been published, and they are, either false or they've been made to, made to be fakes ultimately. Or, there are examples, of course, of showing how weak the peer review system is. So to my mind, it is a system ripe for improvement, if not a total overhaul of the whiteboard variety that we've been talking about today. And, and again, I think it's one of those areas where particularly academic librarians, I think, could play a very big role, whether that's in designing the system, maybe running some of the journals, maybe supporting or partnering with scholarly societies, which have such good track records in some areas for journals. And, I think, I don't mean to make everything a kind of a rant against for-profits in the field, but it always struck me as so bizarre that we were the people who wrote the articles, right? As academics, we were the ones who for free did the peer reviewing of other articles. We then paid through our libraries to subscribe to the journals that we wrote and peer reviewed. Like, it doesn't make any sense, and the profits are taken by a third-party publisher who's located in some other country. It's bizarre. The publishing system makes really almost no sense to me. So I do think that there is opportunity, and whether that's open access journals that are combined with peer review, I think there are lots of possibilities.
I don't think you'll get any arguments from anyone that peer review needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
I think there's a general consensus of that, and this could be just another way of possibly doing it. It's certainly worth exploring.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I want to switch topics just a tad. In your book, Bibliotech, in 2015, you wrote that copyright was actually a hindrance to building strong library collections, and particularly in the digital era.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit about that? What do you think needs to be changed in copyright law so that it no longer poses such a hindrance?
Sure. I mean, I think we've been ripe for a reform of the Copyright Act for a long time. Again, I think librarians have done a very good job of carving out some exceptions, and certainly using the fair use exception in a number of ways in Section 107. I think if you were merely imagining the physical realm and thinking about purchasing copies of works and including them in a collection, I think it works okay. The old copyright system, I could improve it, but I think it allows for that. I think when you get into the digital zone, I think it allows for very great levels of rent seeking by publishers, and it allows for clamping down on the offering of ebooks in certain ways, which we've seen different points along the way. And obviously in the negotiation, you see some dispute now about the role that Amazon plays in the digital realm relative to libraries. I know that's a hot topic at the moment. The point is that librarians under the current copyright system for digital materials don't have a first sale. There's no digital first sale doctrine. There are concerns around orphan works. There are a number of things that I would certainly adjust in the copyright regime to make it easier for a collection librarian like Anne or others to do the digital collection side better. I think the draconian side fear is that libraries go from owners of the material to merely being renters of the material and actually having nothing in the collection, right? But that's possible under the market conditions we have right now and under the Copyright Act that we have right now. I don't think that's a good outcome if that's in fact the case. An example, I can't remember if I put it in Bibliotech, but the example that I was so struck by when I was a library director was we held a large number of materials that a publisher came and asked us to be able to borrow, to be able to digitize, so they could then sell it back to us. Why? Because the publisher that had the copyright was long out of business and didn't actually even own physical copies of the thing they held the copyright to. It was bizarre, right? And ultimately we said, we struck actually quite a good deal, I think, by saying, look, we will give you those copies back. You have to give us a free digital copy. We're not paying you again for what you just digitized. And you may exploit them for a number of years, but you have to agree to put them in the public domain, which they did. So I think there are ways to manage that. But just thinking about the way that the copyright statute works right now, the holes that it has from a digital perspective, it just wasn't designed for this moment. And there are a bunch of bizarre outcomes that derive from that.
Yeah, I really agree with you. I wonder sometimes if ownership will become passé. It's kind of a frightening thought, at least for libraries.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. Thank you, John.
So in 2005, my tribe were all pretty chuffed when Terry Bellinger, who led the rare books department at the University of Virginia, got a MacArthur Genius Grant, if I can. It's such a cool thing to call it that. And, I went looking back to see if I could find any others who had achieved that great pinnacle or something like it. And you don't really find that very many librarians break into that kind of echelon, get the kind of recognition, support, benefit for the community. Is there something we should be doing that would give us as a profession more exposure? Not necessarily more money, not Genius Grants, but, all that sales therein.
Sure. I mean, maybe fellowships for sure. I see that would be a good thing. And we can talk another time about the exact process through which, that pipeline is filled, put it that way, in terms of nominations and peer reviews and so forth. But
that pipeline.
No, I understand. So, but yes, is the point. I mean, I think it is, maybe it goes back to Tom's point earlier about creativity. So taking the MacArthur Fellowship as an example, what that is awarded for are individuals who have done incredibly creative things and then promise through what they will do to do more creative things. I don't think that, at least in the digital era, has been a huge watchword for libraries in terms of creativity and innovation, and it hasn't been generating a field that with a bunch of people well known for that creativity and innovation. So I do think that is maybe something that is an opportunity. I feel like there are and the point is not that everybody has to be like an artist or like a musician or whatever who works in a library, and there are very immediate things that have to get accomplished day to day. But I think it's an interesting thing to reflect upon, and my impression for why that's the case is that the press of everyday work is so great in most libraries, and most libraries are underfunded for what they're expected to do, and expected to pay for and do more things than is possible, and therefore the ability to be in a more creative mode, more innovative mode is actually tricky, and to be doing that at a level that is observed enough that something like a MacArthur Fellowship or whatever the equivalent might be would come the way of a librarian or an archivist. So I think it might be a way for the field also to think about how it's structured, and what is rewarded, and maybe doing that in collaboration with others like foundations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure there are that many opportunities for that level of participation that are made available because of what you were saying earlier. People have day jobs. So, they have their jobs. They have to do that.
And it's a service, process ultimately, right? You have people who are expecting you to do something very immediately and to provide something, or to as opposed to create something totally new. And even in I understand even in rich institutions like the one I worked in at Harvard, it's hard to kind of scare up creative time for someone just to imagine something new when the expectation is that you're trying to get that scholar what they need, or that student what they need, or or curate a collection in a broad sense.
Yeah, exactly. Again, switching topics a little bit, from your current perspective and awareness about what's going on library-wise in the foundation world, we are wondering what areas of funder interest are out there that various funders are interested in funding, that as things seem to be moving away from the traditional areas like funding metadata and digitization projects.
Yes, I think a good question, and as you probably know, funding trends come and go over a period of time, so that foundations both have long-term goals and long-term commitments, and also respond to immediate needs. So in the case of MacArthur Foundation, we have two areas that are so-called enduring commitments. One is journalism and media, and we fund the traditionally underfunded public media of the United States, and we also are committed on a long-term basis to our home city of Chicago. But the other things that we do are meant to rotate over a period of time. Alas, libraries are not one of them at the moment, but certainly one of the bigger funders in the space has been the Knight Foundation, which I was the board chair of for several years, and now it's still on the board. Certainly the interest of the Knight Foundation in its libraries work is to serve the core goals of the foundation, which is to inform and engage communities, but to do that by supporting innovation, and has been the reason that it has been supporting the kinds of things, Tom, that I think you're saying have not been possible for librarians, is to say when you have new ideas or you want the space to create something new, we want to do something catalytic. And that's ultimately what I would say is true for foundations, at least at the moment. My observation is that we do not want to do kind of long-term funding of something that is a public good. In other words, something that ought to be funded by a community or by a government or by a school. So you are not going to see large foundations just giving general operating supports to a bunch of libraries. It's just not going to happen for a number of reasons. However, to be involved in catalyzing change of a certain sort, to be involved in making possible a transition or a form of leadership or meeting a particular need, that's meaningful. So I think that's why I can speak for the Knight Foundation when I was board chair anyway, was the various challenges we put on. So with work calls to librarians saying, if you have some good ideas, come out and we'll fund them, which is what we did over a number of years. Likewise, doing some things in some particular communities like Charlotte, where it is a Knight community, and the library steps up and says, we want to do this big new innovative thing. That's when foundations are going to fund it. So I think for librarians to imagine that foundations will largely step in, it is, there's a little bit of a push and pull, right? It is, if there are a bunch of ideas that really are extremely promising and can be supported in a meaningful way, I think there are lots of funding streams out there. Whether or not the boards and the staff are going to step up and do it is a different question. I will say when Tracy Hall became president of the ALA recently and came and talked to me about some of her diversity, equity, inclusion issues that she was bringing forward, that was something we stepped up and said, we're not funding in libraries, but of course we're going to support you. She's in Chicago. She's a known leader and is doing, a lot of cool stuff. So part of it is, having good ideas, stepping up and asking for it. And particularly in places where foundations have place-based efforts, I would hope that there would be some response.
So if a librarian has a good idea, there's a chance he or she could be funded for even if it was experimental, I assume.
Absolutely, but I would say you can't have the passive voice involved, right? It's not to be funded. It's actually, you got to go seek it, right? It has to be. You've got to find somebody in your community, whether it's a community foundation or it's a big national foundation that happens to focus on it. It does take work as opposed to. My sense is that those who haven't been involved that much in getting grant funding, it's a little bit of, okay, maybe I'll sit back and I will get funded. That's not really going to happen except in very few cases. And in fact, actually the MacArthur Fellowship is one where there's no, it's a nomination process as opposed to a proposal process. So I guess it could happen in some cases, but that's pretty rare.
I know when I got my MPA, there were entire courses on grantsmanship. So
yes.
So I understand. Thanks. Exactly. Thank you, John. Thank you.
So we are nearing the end of our half hour or whatever together. And before we conclude, is there something that we should have asked you or that you'd like to tell us, even though we didn't ask it?
No, thank you. I do hope anybody who's ever looking at this will know my gratitude to librarians and to libraries as institutions. I really do think it's a bedrock part of our democracy in the United States and around the world. And I do hope that I can continue to be a citizen supporter, put it that way, of libraries, particularly those who are seeking reform and trying to broaden access, which I think is such an important thing to do.
Well, thank you very much, John. Your sense of appreciation for what libraries and librarians do is really welcome. I really appreciate it. I'm a librarian who really appreciates that sense of appreciation for what we do.
Well, it's very genuine, Tom. Thank you.
So, thank you. Thank you very much.
And maybe you can become a Charleston frequent, not choir, frequent visitor. We have various people that keep coming back. Brewster is one of them. We lived with him through the evolution of this library of his and controlled digital lending. And it's been interesting to follow some of the leaders around us in the way they advance major proposals and ideas and innovations. So,
very cool. Well, I look forward to absolutely coming in person when you open back up.
Definitely. I'm sure a number of us would love to see you again. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.